Verdan here. Well, on my mind is bad arguments and the conclusion that we like or agree with and how those two might interact. A bad argument is, well, always bad. It's never good just because you happen to agree with the conclusion of the argument. So the conclusion in and of itself, independent of that argument, might be something that you say, yes, that's true. I agree with that. It's real. I feel like that's correct or whatever. And that doesn't make the argument good. So it's possible to object to an argument while supporting the conclusion of it. Because remember, the purpose of logic is to see if the argumentation is one that is worth your time to investigate further into, or is one that you should be skeptical of. And I think that sometimes people hear skepticism and they don't understand that it doesn't mean that you don't believe the thing. It means that you don't know if it's true or false. Maybe you have an opinion one way or the other, but within the system of logic itself, you're saying your argument's bad and I have to be skeptical of it. Go fix your argument. You might independently agree. So I could say that, lobsters exist or I'm Superman. Well, I'm not Superman, therefore lobsters exist. I mean, what? Or, lobsters don't exist or my light is on. They do exist, so my light must be off, but it's on. So, it doesn't, the thing doesn't make any sense. So the truth of the light being on, independent of the argument, might be correct. But because of the argument being bad, you should say, well, I'm going to be skeptical. But the light's right on. Yes, but you didn't need that bad argument. You still need to go fix your argument. So an example, there's plenty of them, was a friend of mine was talking about politics, and as that particular topic goes, it's usually charged with a lot of emotion. And he said, well, Trump is racist. And I said, well, what makes you think that? What makes you say that? He said, well, there's this thing that I read. I said, okay, did that thing that you read, did that come from Trump himself, or did it come from a second party? Well, it came from a second party. Well, then it might be possible that they altered whatever was said to make it seem like he said something that he didn't, and perhaps you should go to the source and see what he actually said. Okay, that's fair, but I'm pretty sure he's racist anyways. He might be. I don't know what that means necessarily, or what you think racism is or isn't, or how that might work in your head, but the argument being bad should mean that you say, oh, this might be true, it might not be true, but the fact is I'm basing this off of something that's secondhand information, not the actual source. And if I have the actual source to go to and I'll look at that and then I say, okay, well, that's racist. Okay, well, that's different. But not doing that is not a good methodology, because obviously the second party has some bias one way or the other. Now, maybe, of course, it could be the opposite, that they're saying Trump is good, and turns out that you look into the matter further and it's like, well, he didn't do the good thing in this case, or whatever it is. But it's very tempting to allow our personal preference on the conclusion to make us ignore the horrible argument that the person has presented. I've heard people argue for things that they're very passionate about and they absolutely 100% believe in. And they kind of hold that particular topic almost as it's a sacred topic that should never be dismissed or talked about or disagreed with to any level at all, because it could hurt somebody. Well, that's a bad argument. You could say that about every single idea out there, everything out there. But yeah, for the other ideas, who cares? But for this one, because I think it's important, this one's a special topic, and so it's okay to give bad arguments for that topic because I like it and I agree with it, and I don't want it challenged ever. No, all ideas are up to be challenged. No idea is free or immune from debate or attack or however you want to put that. Some say, well, no, this idea though, you can't debate this one. Why not? Well, because it would lead to bad consequences. How do you know that? What's your argument that you shouldn't debate this topic? See, that's a different argument then. And we're still kind of talking about the topic that you didn't want to debate in general, but you're now debating about whether you should debate. Kind of odd, but if you had a valid and sound argument, then great. My experience, although it's a very small dot on the radar and is an appeal to the minority of one, is that when I see those sort of arguments presented that are feelings over facts, emotion over evidence, that it's really hard to get the person to give you the burden of proof, which is what they owe you by making the positive claim. They'll say things like, it's out there, go look it up, go Google it, it's on YouTube, whatever, go look at this person's channel. They won't give you specifics. Or when they do, they many of times haven't actually looked at the specifics to see whether or not they agree with their point, or if they have, you looking at them still doesn't really help their argument per se. Like, it's like, well, it says something about your argument, but it doesn't fill in the gaps of your bad argument. It's still not quite there. But I shouldn't even investigate further because you didn't give me a proper argument anyway, so I have no compelling reason to. I might be interested on my own, but that's separate from the bad argument. The bad argument is still bad, even if I think that the conclusion by itself is interesting or true or valuable in some way, shape, or form. What it means is I don't investigate further into the matter because your argument sucked, because it wasn't good. I'm done. That's it. I don't have to spend more time or energy on that. I could, but I don't. I'm not compelled by logic to do so. And independently, I might actually agree with your conclusion, but I'm just saying that's a bad argument. The way that we use logic is something that I'm trying to address here. That when you apply the system of analyzing any given argument, and for me, it's usually I'm using informal logic because I'm looking at natural language and trying to find the syllogisms that are embedded in them, the arguments that are hidden in there, and extract out what the person might be trying to say, and then point out the fallacy that I have exposed, if any. Now, am I doing a good job on that? Well, that's up to you to figure out, because I can't analyze my own arguments. Obviously, I'm going to have a bias towards myself being right. Although I can analyze my past self's arguments when I was a theist, and I've done that a few times. Maybe it's time to do another one of those. But at any rate, but you have to know logic to be able to analyze the analysis. Okay, well, maybe you missed a few. You're right, there was logical fallacy, but actually there was more than you thought. Or, well, maybe you were too hard there. Well, okay, we should always be pretty analytical and rough, I think. But, I mean, there's times to steel man the argument, and then there's times to just shut it down and be like, look, you screwed up. Come on. You know, like the the previous video I'd done on the DD guy, whatever, Doolin, whatever his name was, that it's like, look at nature, that proves God. It's like, what? And it's interesting to me that whenever people talk about nature proving God, they always point to the nice things about nature. Like, I've not seen anyone go, look at all the viruses. That means God exists, it's not done. But the bad stuff of nature would also have to prove God if the good stuff of nature proves God. But they don't present the bad stuff. It's just kind of odd that would be a trend. But at any rate. So it could be politics, it could be, philosophy, it could be anything really that you encounter this argument, and maybe you don't know what the fallacy is, or even if there is one, but it's like, is that really a decent argument? Are they, even if I can agree with the conclusion in the end, have they presented this in a coherent manner? Or even if I disagree with their conclusion, have they made a valid and sound argument? Because the reverse can be true, where I'm already disagreeing with everything they say, but I have to set that aside to listen to the argument, because that's what matters. If it's valid and sound, if it's coherent, it doesn't matter if it's emotionally compelling, or at least it shouldn't. But if it's robust, if it's scientific, or if it's a solid syllogism, then I must investigate into the matter further, regardless of how I feel about the conclusion. The logic compels me to do so. And certainly I've noticed my own weak points on this, because I've dealt with a lot of topics over time, and I found the areas where my emotions interfere with my logic. And it's like, okay, I've got to do something that makes it that I can address those topics with reason and objectiveness, whatever that is. I need to figure that out in my own head, because I need to be able to debate those things, because I think it's important to be able to debate all the ideas that are out there, that even ones you agree with. It can be a good exercise to take the other side and see if you can make a decent argument for it. Of course, you might say, well, what's the argument for God that's like the best argument for God, or something like that? It's a tough challenge. Of course, the one that I have presented almost as a reductio ad absurdum is that any God that wants you to believe it by faith must be true, because we don't have any empirical evidence or repeatable tests or valid and sound argument for it. So that God would probably exist, because the moment that you had evidence, then it couldn't be a God that just wants you to believe in it by faith. But then, of course, that would make several God concepts true simultaneously, and that would maybe be a problem. But it's still an argument. Is it a good one? No, because it says that the very fact that there isn't a good argument is evidence that there's this particular type of God. So it's an argument in a way, but it's not a good one. Is there a good argument for God? Not that I know of. I've been looking a long time. I've tried. Hypotheticals probably the best you're going to get for it. And even then, it's just something, I can argue for the other side, but I have to basically use one of the arguments already that's out there and just turn it into hypothetical or something to even, make it passable to some extent. So obviously you're going to run into that if you argue against positions that you don't agree with, where you can't even find it. You can't make a good argument, but you're going to make the best one that you could make, whatever that might be. Maybe it's the one with the least amount of fallacies in it. And some people think, well, the logic doesn't really matter. It's the presentation. If you're really charismatic, you'll win over people that way. Well, the logic always matters, to those that care about logic, obviously. So it's kind of like saying, well, if you're awesome enough, and you win over the teacher with how cool and funny you are, it doesn't really matter that you failed the math test. They'll erase that and give you an A because you've convinced them with your personality that they should. Well, but no, it does matter that you failed the test. It's just that you're getting a result that you shouldn't get. So the whole class loves you and the teacher loves you and you're getting the good grades even though you're technically you should be failing. Well, just because that's how people are responding doesn't mean that you've actually won the debate, you've won the issue. It just means that the people also have a problem in that they should know logic enough to realize that no matter how cool the person is, if you fail the test, that's it. You failed the test and you should get an F. You shouldn't get a passing grade. And in a similar way, just because someone's charismatic in a debate, that doesn't mean that they should win. They might have a good argument and be charismatic. That's cool. They might be really dull and boring, but have a valid and sound argument. Or they might be dull and boring and have a bad argument. But their personality just should be irrelevant. And if somebody said, well, that's what's going to win and actually win the debate, well, it's going to win over people, but that's not the same as winning a debate. Because winning a debate, you're talking about the confines of logic, which means they have to win within that rule set. Otherwise, they didn't win. So I don't know what got me thinking about this, but I just thought it was something to talk about and put out there for you to think about, because maybe you needed to think about it, maybe you didn't, I don't know, whatever, something I did. Can't analyze my own reasoning for this at any rate. So hopefully that made you think about this sort of stuff, and if you have questions, comments, or whatever, put them down there and I'll respond to them. And Rand Huso is on right now. Hi. Nobody here but us chickens. Haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you in chat. But yeah, I look forward to any questions you might have about this particular topic in the comment section below. Rand, you joined just as I'm ending this particular live stream. So thanks for watching and listening until we have a valid and sound argument. We should be skeptical of the conclusions. Finn is usually the thing I would type in chat. I haven't done that in a while. It just felt better in the other older way. Oh well.